My siblings thought it would be funny to exclude me from our grandmother's will as a joke, to teach me a lesson about family values. Let's see if she finally learns, my stepmother laughed as they toasted with champagne at the reading. I didn't fight it. 6 months later, they showed up at my door in Maine, asking for money. I was already running the most successful bed and breakfast on the coast. Let me tell you exactly how the black sheep became the golden goose. The attorney's voice droned on, reading the formal language of my grandmother's last will and testament. I sat in the leather chair, my hands folded in my lap, trying to ignore the smirks from across the mahogany table. My older brother Marcus leaned back with that familiar expression of smug satisfaction. My younger sister Vanessa picked at her manicured nails, barely containing her smile. And my stepmother Patricia sat at the head of the table like she'd orchestrated the whole thing, which of course she had. And to my granddaughter Claire Harrison, the attorney continued, and my heart lifted for just a moment, I leave my collection of recipe cards and the quilt from my bedroom. May she finally learn what truly matters in a family. The room erupted in barely suppressed laughter. Marcus actually snorted. Vanessa covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Patricia just smiled that thin, satisfied smile she'd perfected over the 15 years since she'd married my father. Before we begin, I want to thank you for being here. If you're drawn to stories of women who refuse to stay down when life knocks them flat, consider subscribing. It's free and helps share more stories of resilience and redemption. Now let me tell you how being written off became the best thing that ever happened to me. The bulk of my grandmother's estate, including her beautiful Victorian home in Portland, her investment portfolio, and her shares in my father's construction company, all went to Marcus and Vanessa in equal parts. The reason, according to the carefully worded clause Patricia had helped grandmother draft in her final months, was that I had abandoned family responsibilities in pursuit of selfish dreams and needed to learn the value of family before material inheritance. What they meant was that I'd moved to Seattle at 25 to pursue interior design instead of joining the family construction business. That I'd missed 2 Thanksgivings because of work deadlines. That I'd chosen my career over being the dutiful daughter who showed up to every Sunday dinner and company picnic. My father had passed 3 years ago, too suddenly to update his own will, which had left everything to Patricia anyway. Grandmother had been my last hope, not for money, but for validation. For someone in my family to say that my choices mattered, that I mattered. Claire, don't look so devastated, Patricia said as we filed out of the attorney's office, her voice dripping with false concern. This is for your own good. Maybe now you'll understand what it means to build something with family instead of running away. I didn't run away, I managed, my voice tight. I built a career. Marcus laughed, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to sting. A career renting out other people's furniture. Real impressive, sis. Interior design for residential properties, I wanted to snap back. I'd worked with some of Seattle's most expensive homes. But what was the point? They'd never seen me as anything but the family disappointment, the one who wanted more than what they'd planned for me. The recipe cards are actually quite valuable, Vanessa added, her voice saccharine sweet. Grandma's chocolate chip cookies were legendary. Maybe you can finally learn to bake. They climbed into Marcus's Range Rover, still laughing, probably headed to celebrate their windfall at some expensive restaurant. I stood on the sidewalk, holding a banker's box containing recipe cards written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting and a quilt that smelled like lavender and betrayal. My phone buzzed. My friend Jessica, from Seattle. How did it go? I couldn't even begin to type a response. How do you explain that your family thinks so little of you that they turned your inheritance into a public humiliation? That your own grandmother's final act was to tell you that you weren't good enough? I drove to my grandmother's house, my hands shaking on the wheel. Patricia had already changed the locks, she'd been granted immediate possession as executor. I sat in my rental car across the street, staring at the white Victorian with its wraparound porch and widow's walk. I'd spent every summer there as a child, before my mother died, before Patricia entered our lives and slowly poisoned my father and siblings against me. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I opened my banking app, looking at my savings. $38,000. Not much by Portland standards, but I'd been careful. No husband, no kids, just me and my career that my family thought was so worthless. I had 3 weeks left on my apartment lease in Seattle. No real ties except a job I'd been growing tired of anyway, styling the same modern minimalist spaces for tech executives who spent more time traveling than in their homes. The recipe cards sat on the passenger seat. I picked up the box and actually looked through them this time. Underneath the cookies and the pot roast, I found something else. A yellowed business card paper-clipped to a folded map. Coastal Properties of Maine, Grace Chen with a phone number. On the map, a spot was circled in blue ink on the southern coast. Scribbled in the margin in my grandmother's handwriting. The one that got away. Built in 1889. Always dreamed of restoring it. I opened my laptop right there in the car and searched the address. A real estate listing popped up immediately. Historic Sea Captain's Home. Needs TLC, Harborside, Maine. $145,000. The photos showed a disaster. Peeling paint, sagging porch, overgrown yard. But the bones were there, the Victorian architecture my grandmother had always loved, the ocean view, the potential. And more importantly, it was 3,000 miles from Portland, from my family, from everything that had just told me I wasn't enough. I called the number before I could talk myself out of it. Coastal Properties, this is Grace speaking. Hi, I'm calling about the property in Harborside. The Victorian that needs restoration. Is it still available? Oh, that old beauty. Yes, it's still on the market. Been sitting for 2 years now. Owners are estate-motivated sellers. Are you looking for an investment property? Or, I want to see it. Tomorrow, if possible. I can be there by evening. Grace's voice brightened with professional enthusiasm. Well, that's wonderful. I should warn you though, it needs significant work. The inspection report alone is 40 pages. I understand, I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up and sat there, my heart pounding. This was insane. I'd never bought property, never managed a renovation, never even been to Maine. I was an interior designer who staged other people's houses, not someone who rebuilt them from scratch. But as I looked at that recipe card with my grandmother's writing, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly, but defiance. They wanted to teach me a lesson about family and hard work? Fine. I'd learn it on my own terms. I texted Jessica. I'm not coming back to Seattle. Selling everything. Moving to Maine. Long story. Her response came immediately. What? Call me now. But I didn't call. Instead, I drove to a hotel, packed up my grandmother's quilt and recipe cards, and booked a one-way flight to Boston with a connection to Portland, Maine. 24 hours later, I stood in front of the Victorian house that would become either my greatest triumph or most spectacular failure. The photos hadn't done the disrepair justice. Paint hung in strips like peeling skin. The porch sagged so dramatically I was afraid to step on it. Windows were broken, shutters hung at angles, and the yard looked like something from a Gothic novel. Grace Chen, a petite woman in her 60s with kind eyes and sensible shoes, stood beside me with a clipboard. I have to be honest with you, Claire. This is a massive project. The foundation needs work, the plumbing is original to 1889, the electrical is a fire hazard, and don't even get me started on the roof. Most people look at this and run. How much are they asking? 145, but I think I can get them down to 120 given the condition. You'd be doing them a favor, taking it off their hands. I walked around the property, my designer's eye automatically seeing past the decay to the potential underneath. The turret could be spectacular with the right restoration. The Widow's Walk had a 360 ocean view. The property was 2 acres, plenty of room for gardens. The location was perfect, walking distance to the small harbor town, but private enough for peace. What's the town like? I asked Grace. Harborside? It's sleepy most of the year, population around 2,000. Summers, we get tourists for the beaches and lobster boats. There's one grocery store, a hardware store, post office, library, and 3 restaurants including the best clam shack in Maine, if I do say so myself. She smiled. My family's been here for 4 generations. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, for better or worse. Are there any bed and breakfasts? Grace's expression shifted, interested now. Is that what you're thinking? There used to be the Harborview Inn, but it closed 5 years ago when the owners retired. Nearest one now is 20 minutes north in Camden. We actually get a lot of tourists asking for places to stay. That night, in a motel room, I made a list. On the left side, All the reasons this was crazy. No construction experience. No hospitality experience. Barely enough money for the down payment, let alone renovations. 3,000 miles from anyone I knew. On the right side, nothing but white space and one sentence I kept writing and erasing and writing again. Because they said I couldn't. I called Grace the next morning. Make the offer. $120,000. And I need a recommendation for a contractor who works with historic properties and won't charge me an arm and a leg. Oh honey. Grace laughed, but it was warm, not condescending. You're really doing this, aren't you? All right. The contractor you want is James Whitmore. He's the best in the county for restoration work, and he's fair. I'll text you his number. 3 weeks later, I owned a falling-down Victorian house in a town where I knew exactly one person. My savings account was down to $18,000 after the down payment and closing costs. I'd sold my car, my furniture, and most of my belongings. Everything I had left fit in my rental car, clothes, laptop, design portfolio, grandmother's quilt, and those recipe cards. I slept in the one room that seemed structurally sound, on an air mattress I'd bought at the hardware store, wrapped in my grandmother's quilt. The house creaked and groaned around me like a living thing. Rain dripped through holes in the roof into carefully placed buckets. My phone had 1 bar of signal, and the Wi-Fi wouldn't be installed for another week. For the first time since the will reading, I cried. Not pretty tears, but ugly sobbing, the kind where you can't breathe and your chest hurts. I cried for my grandmother. For the family that had never really been mine. For the career I'd walked away from. For the terror of what I'd just committed to. Then I dried my face, made instant coffee on a camping stove, and called James Whitmore. He arrived an hour later in a pickup truck that had seen better decades, a man in his early 60s with white hair, weathered skin, and the careful way of walking that spoke of a lifetime of hard physical labor. He spent 2 hours going through the house with me, making notes, taking photos, occasionally whistling through his teeth at particularly egregious examples of deferred maintenance. Finally, we sat on the back steps looking out at the ocean, gray and choppy under October clouds. I can do it, he said. But it's going to take time and money. I'd estimate 9 months of work and about $80,000, and that's with me giving you my best price and you doing some of the labor yourself. My stomach dropped. I have $18,000. James looked at me for a long moment. Why are you doing this, Claire? You're young, you're clearly smart, you could do anything. Why pour your life into a wreck like this? I thought about lying, about making up some business plan or investment strategy. Instead, I told him the truth. About my grandmother's will, about my family's cruelty disguised as a life lesson, about finding that recipe card and map. When I finished, James was quiet. Then he said, my daughter moved to Boston for her career. My wife and I barely see her, maybe twice a year. We give her grief about it every time, tell her she's throwing away family for some corporate job. He looked at me. But the truth is, we're scared of losing her. Sounds like your family was scared too, just handled it worse. That doesn't excuse. No, it doesn't. I'm not excusing them. I'm just saying, I understand both sides. He stood, brushing off his jeans. Here's what I'll do. I'll work with you in phases. We'll start with making it livable and weathertight, focus on the critical systems. That's about $20,000 worth of work. You can pay me as you go, and we'll figure out the rest when we get there. But Claire, you're going to have to work alongside me. I can't afford to bring in a full crew at these rates. I don't know anything about construction. You're going to learn. He held out his hand, calloused and solid. 6 a.m, Monday. Dress in clothes you don't mind destroying. I shook his hand, and in that moment, I felt the first flicker of something that might become hope. The next 4 months were the hardest work of my life. James taught me how to safely tear out water-damaged walls, how to identify load-bearing beams, how to patch a roof, how to snake drain lines. My hands, soft from years of computer work and fabric samples, developed blisters that turned to calluses. My back ached constantly. I fell into bed every night at 8, too exhausted to even feel sorry for myself. But the house was taking shape. We'd replaced the roof, rewired the first floor, installed new plumbing. James had a way of explaining things that made sense, treating me like a capable adult learning a new skill rather than a helpless woman playing at construction. In November, Grace Chen stopped by with a casserole and an introduction. Claire, this is Margaret Foster. She runs the Historical Society and the library. Margaret, this is Claire Harrison, the crazy young woman who bought the old Morrison place. Margaret was in her 70s, rail-thin with sharp eyes and a way of looking at you like she could read your entire history. I heard someone was finally doing something with this house. Built by Captain Morrison in 1889, you know. He made his fortune in the merchant marine, built this for his wife, died in a storm before their first anniversary. That's tragic, I said. That's Maine, Margaret replied matter-of-factly. His wife lived here for 63 more years, ran it as a boarding house for sailors. Grace tells me you're thinking of doing something similar? A bed and breakfast, eventually. If I can ever get it finished. Margaret walked through the house with the confidence of someone who'd been in it 100 times before, running her fingers along doorframes, nodding at our restoration work. When she returned to where Grace and I waited in the gutted kitchen, she said, "You're doing it right. Respecting the bones. I have photographs from the Historical Society, if you want to see what it looked like in its heyday. Might help with your design decisions." I would love that. Good. Come by Thursday afternoon. I'm there Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 to 4. She handed me a business card that looked like it had been printed in 1987. Also, I can cook. Not fancy, but solid Maine food. If you need someone to teach you to make proper chowder and biscuits for your future guests, I'm available. After they left, I stared at Margaret's card. This was new. In Seattle, everyone I'd met through work had been transactional. Professional. Here, people just offered help, expected nothing immediate in return. It was disorienting and oddly touching. By December, the house was weathertight and had functioning heat, electricity, and plumbing. I'd burned through all my savings and taken out a small business loan guaranteed against the property. The bank officer, a nervous young man who clearly thought I was insane, had approved $15,000 at a surprisingly reasonable rate after Grace vouched for me. "Harborside needs businesses," she'd told him firmly. "And this girl's got more grit than anyone I've seen in 20 years. I started working on the interior myself. This was my domain. I spent hours at the Historical Society with Margaret, studying photographs of the original interiors. I scoured estate sales and antique shops for period-appropriate furniture I could restore. I taught myself to strip wallpaper, refinish floors, repair plaster. James still came by twice a week, helping with the bigger projects and checking my work. He brought his wife Linda one afternoon, a woman who greeted me with a hug like we were old friends and immediately started suggesting paint colors. "Don't let her bully you," James warned with a smile. "She redecorated our house 17 times. 18. Linda corrected, walking through the rooms with an appraising eye. "This yellow in the dining room, no. Too cold. You want warm tones, make people hungry. And this wallpaper sample. Absolutely not. You're not running a funeral home." She was right on both counts. We spent that afternoon going through my design ideas, Linda offering opinions that were surprisingly sophisticated. She'd worked as a set designer for a community theater for 30 years, she told me. She understood space and atmosphere. As she was leaving, she turned at the door. "You're going to make this beautiful. I can tell. You see what it could be, not just what it is. That's rare." By February, I was ready to start the most terrifying part, actually learning to run a hospitality business. Margaret made good on her promise, teaching me to make perfect clam chowder, blueberry muffins, proper coffee. We worked in my newly renovated kitchen, me taking notes like a student while she narrated techniques her mother had taught her. "Hospitality isn't about fancy food or expensive linens," she said, showing me how to fold napkins into simple, elegant shapes. "It's about making people feel cared for." My mother ran a boarding house during the Depression. She said the secret was treating every guest like they were family coming home. "My family is the last model I want to follow," I said before I could stop myself. Margaret looked at me sharply. "You want to tell me about that?" So, I did. I found myself telling her the whole story, the will reading, the humiliation, the recipe card that had led me here. When I finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Good," she finally said. "Good? They gave you a gift, even if they didn't mean to. They cut the ropes tying you to a life you didn't want. Most people never get that clean a break. They spend their whole lives trying to prove something to people who'll never appreciate it. You got to walk away." I'd never thought of it that way. The hurt was still there, the anger at being dismissed. But maybe Margaret was right. Maybe being excluded had actually freed me. March brought the first inklings of spring and my first crisis. The main staircase, which we thought was solid, turned out to be structurally compromised. James broke the news over coffee, his expression grim. It's going to cost $12,000 to properly restore it. We can't cut corners on this, Claire. It's a safety issue. I did the math in my head. With my remaining loan money and what I'd budgeted for furniture and marketing, I had $8,000. I could maybe stretch to $9,000 if I lived on rice and beans. What if we do part of it now, finish it later? Doesn't work like that. It's all or nothing. I sat on the back steps, where I'd taken to going when I needed to think. The ocean was still winter gray, angry and cold. I'd come so far. The house was nearly finished. I'd taught myself skills I'd never imagined having. I'd built relationships in this community. And now, one staircase might derail everything. Grace found me there an hour later. I'd called her in desperation, hoping she might know of some grant or program I'd missed. Crying? She asked, sitting down beside me. Trying not to. James told me about the staircase. I have an idea, but you're going to have to swallow some pride. At this point, I have no pride left. What is it? The town has a small business development fund. It's not much, maybe $5,000 maximum, but it's for projects that benefit the community. A bed and breakfast definitely qualifies. You'd have to present to the town council, explain your business plan, make your case. The thought of standing in front of strangers, begging for money, made my stomach churn. But what choice did I have? The town council met in the library basement on a Tuesday evening. 8 people sat at a folding table, ranging from a lobsterman in his 20s to the retired postmaster who had to be pushing 90. I stood at the front with a folder full of plans, photos, and projections I'd spent 3 days preparing. I explained my vision. A 5-bedroom bed and breakfast celebrating Maine's maritime history, offering an authentic coastal experience. I showed them my design plans, my menu ideas, my marketing strategy. I laid out the numbers, honest about my budget crisis. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the retired postmaster, Harold, cleared his throat. Why should we invest in you? You're not from here. You've been here, what, 5 months? What's to stop you from taking our money and selling the place next year? It was the question I'd been dreading, the one I'd asked myself in the dark hours of the night. I could have given them a business answer, talked about contracts and commitments. Instead, I told them the truth. I don't have anywhere else to go. My family doesn't want me. Seattle doesn't need me. But this house needs me. This town has been kind to me. People I barely know have helped me, taught me, believed in me. I want to build something here, something that lasts. Not for them, for me. Because I need to prove to myself that I can. Margaret, sitting in the back, smiled. The vote was 6-2 in favor. $5,000, to be repaid interest-free over 5 years once the business was operational. I walked out into the spring evening, past Grace, who winked at me, past James and Linda who'd both shown up for support, and I sat in my car and cried again. But this time, they were different tears. The staircase was finished by late April. I spent May furnishing the rooms, making each one unique but cohesive. The captain's room with navy blue walls and maritime antiques. The garden room in soft greens and florals. The lighthouse room with its window seat and ocean views. I photographed everything, built a website, listed on booking platforms. My first guests arrived on Memorial Day weekend, a couple from Connecticut celebrating their anniversary. I served them Margaret's blueberry muffins and my hard-won clam chowder. They loved it, left a glowing review, and booked for the following year before checking out. By mid-June, I was averaging 3 rooms occupied per night. I hired a high school student, Maya, to help with cleaning and breakfast service. The money wasn't making me rich, but it was enough to cover expenses and start paying down loans. I fell into a rhythm. Wake at 5, start coffee and breakfast prep. Serve guests at 7:30. Clean rooms, do laundry, handle maintenance. Afternoon for admin. Marketing. Menu, planning. Evening for prep work for the next day. Collapse by 10. It was exhausting but satisfying in a way my design career had never been. Every good review, every returning guest, every referral felt like proof that I'd built something real. On a Thursday in July, Margaret brought photos to the library showing session. This came in yesterday, she said, handing me a magazine. Maine Coastal Living. They're doing a feature on historic bed and breakfasts. You should apply. I've only been open 2 months. So? Your restoration work is spectacular, your story is interesting, and Lord knows we could use the publicity for Harborside. I already took the liberty of contacting the editor and mentioning you. The journalist arrived 2 weeks later, a woman named Sarah who spent an entire day photographing, interviewing, and eating obscene amounts of my baked goods. This is exactly what we're looking for, she said, reviewing her photos. Historic preservation with a personal story. You mind if we include some background about why you came to Maine? I hesitated, thinking of my family reading it. Then I thought, let them. Include whatever you want. The article ran in the September issue, 4 glossy pages with photos that made my house look like something from a fairy tale. From rejection to redemption. How one woman built a dream in Harborside, Maine. Bookings doubled overnight. I had to start maintaining a wait list for peak season next summer. I was in the kitchen making stock on a Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. Maya was off, so I went to answer it myself, wiping my hands on my apron. My stepmother Patricia stood on my porch, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Behind her, in a rental car, I could see Marcus and Vanessa. My first instinct was to slam the door. Instead, I just stood there, waiting. Claire, Patricia began, her voice carefully modulated. You're not an easy person to track down. We saw the article in that magazine. The house looks nice. Thank you. I didn't move from the doorway. Can we come in? We drove all the way from Portland to see you. Why? Patricia's composure cracked slightly. We need to talk to you about a family matter. It's important. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. They filed in, Marcus and Vanessa looking around with barely concealed surprise. I led them to the sitting room, gestured to chairs, and waited. Patricia took the lead, as always. I'll get right to the point. Marcus and Vanessa are having some financial difficulties. The construction business is struggling, Marcus added quickly. Between the economy and some bad bids, we're underwater. We need capital to stay afloat. We thought, given your obvious success here, Vanessa gestured vaguely at the house, that you might be willing to invest. We're family, after all. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm. Finally, I spoke. Let me see if I understand. 6 months ago, you excluded me from grandmother's will to teach me a lesson about family values. You laughed while doing it. You called my career worthless, and now you want me to bail you out? It wasn't personal, Patricia started. It was entirely personal, I interrupted. You wanted to punish me for not being the daughter you wanted, for having dreams beyond your construction company and family dinners. We were trying to help you, Marcus insisted. To show you what really matters. And what's that? Family, Vanessa said, like it was obvious. I laughed, a sound without humor. You want to know what I learned? That family isn't the people who share your blood, it's the people who show up for you. James taught me to rebuild a house when I knew nothing. Margaret taught me to cook when I could barely boil water. Grace vouched for me to the bank when I had no credit history. The town council gave me money when they had no reason to trust me. That's family. You're just people I happen to be related to. So you're saying no? Patricia's voice had an edge now. I'm saying more than no. I'm saying you taught me exactly what you wanted to teach me. You showed me I don't need you. That I'm better off without people who treat love like a transaction, who weaponize inheritance, who think cruelty is the same as tough love. I stood, walked to the door, opened it. I need to get back to work. I have guests arriving at 4. They stood slowly, Marcus's face red, Vanessa's eyes shining with tears that might have been genuine. Patricia just looked coldly furious. You're going to regret this, Patricia said as she passed. When you need family someday, when this little project falls apart, don't come crying to us. I won't, I said simply. Because when this falls apart, if it falls apart, I have an entire town who'll help me rebuild. What do you have? They didn't answer. I watched them drive away, then closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. Maya appeared from the kitchen, where she'd clearly been listening. That was amazing, she breathed. Like something from a movie. More like something from a nightmare, I replied. but I was smiling. That evening, after my guests had settled in, I sat on the widow's walk with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the ocean. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Linda saw your family leave. You okay?" "Better than okay," I typed back. "Tell Linda I'm using the yellow in the dining room after all." She was right. 6 months had passed since that humiliating will reading. 6 months since I'd held a box of recipe cards and felt like the world's biggest failure. In that time, I'd rebuilt a house, learned a trade, started a business, and found a community. I'd proven to myself that I was capable of far more than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. My grandmother's quilt was draped over my favorite chair downstairs. Her recipe cards were in a wooden box in the kitchen, now expanded with my own notes and variations. In a way, she'd given me exactly what I needed, even if she hadn't meant to. She'd given me the kick in the pants to stop living for other people's approval and start building a life I actually wanted. The bed and breakfast was fully booked through October. I'd hired a part-time assistant manager and was considering expanding to offer cooking classes in the off-season. Margaret and I were writing a cookbook together, combining her traditional recipes with my modern plating techniques. Grace had started sending me overflow guests from the bigger inns in Camden. I was making about $40,000 a year, living simply but comfortably. It wasn't the 6-figure salary I'd had in Seattle, but it came without the soul-crushing commute, the office politics, the constant pressure to be someone I wasn't. My phone buzzed again. This time, Jessica from Seattle. "Saw your Instagram. The house is gorgeous. I'm so proud of you." I typed back, "Come visit. First week of September. On the house. Deal." "And Claire? I know I said you were crazy for doing this. I was wrong. You're brave." I wasn't sure about brave. Most days I still felt like I was making it up as I went along, one disaster away from failure. But maybe that was what bravery actually was. Doing the terrifying thing anyway, trusting that you'd figure it out. A car pulled into the driveway, my last check-in of the night. I drained my wine, tucked my phone in my pocket, and headed downstairs to greet them. This was my life now. Not the one my family had planned for me, not the one I'd imagined in Seattle, but something entirely my own. Sometimes the cruelest gestures make the best gifts. By excluding me, they'd freed me. By trying to diminish me, they'd pushed me to grow. By choosing money over relationships, they'd taught me what truly mattered. I'd wanted my grandmother's house, her acknowledgement, her validation. Instead, I'd gotten recipe cards and a quilt and the freedom to build something better than I'd ever been offered. And standing in the foyer of my restored Victorian, ready to welcome strangers who'd become friends, I realized I wouldn't trade it for anything.